Picture this. You've just won the most famous war in human history. You are victorious, you've survived against all odds, and you're finally setting sail for home. But your reward for this massive epic triumph? Well, it's 10 more years of absolute agonizing suffering. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to unpack one of humanity's absolute greatest adventure stories, the Odyssey. We're talking shipwrecks, witches, a terrifying one-eyed Cyclops, and a song so beautiful it literally drove sailors to their deaths. This story has captivated audiences for nearly 3,000 years, and today we're going to break down the myth, the history, and the man behind the legend.
Now, behind every single monster and magic spell on this journey, there lies a massive, glaring question. Was any of it real? And what's really interesting here is that as historical detectives, the real mystery for us isn't actually whether a guy fought literal monsters. The fascinating question is why generations of people firmly believed that he did. Where exactly do myth, memory, and history collide? Well, let's dive right in and find out.
Section 1. Leaving Troy Behind. The Hero's Departure.
So, according to Greek tradition, the Trojan War has finally ended. The burning city is in the rearview mirror, and King Odysseus of Ithaca is ready to head home. Now, his voyage across the Aegean Sea really should have taken a few weeks, maybe a month at the absolute most. Instead, it turns into this grueling 10-year nightmare. So who was this guy whose journey went just so terribly wrong? Well, think about his peers. Someone like Achilles was remembered purely for his strength and brawn, right? But Odysseus, he wasn't remembered as the strongest warrior on the battlefield. His greatest weapon was his mind, his intellect. In fact, Greek tradition credits Odysseus with the brilliant, deceptive idea of the Trojan horse. Though, fun fact here, the famous Trojan horse story doesn't even show up in the Iliad. It actually pops up in later texts like Virgil's Aeneid. But the point absolutely stands. Odysseus was a thinker. He was a master strategist.
But if we want to separate the myth from the reality, we've got to look at the hard evidence. Take Troy, for example. As a city, it almost certainly existed. Archaeology heavily backs that up. But the Trojan horse? Yeah, that entirely lacks archaeological evidence and just seems to be part of a later literary tradition. And what about Odysseus himself? Well, whether he was a real historical person remains completely unknown. But to really understand his story, we kind of have to look past modern archaeology for a second and step right into the mindset of the people who originally told it.
That brings us to Section 2, A World of Monsters, the Supernatural Journey.
To truly get the Odyssey, you really have to understand how the ancient Greeks viewed their everyday world. To us today, these tales are just fun myths, but to the ancient Greeks, the gods were not these distant, invisible entities. They were active. They shaped the storms, the harvests, and even human decisions. Which leads us straight to the monster everyone remembers, Polyphemus. He's this one-eyed giant Cyclops who violently traps Odysseus and his men inside a pitch-black cave. In one of the most famous episodes of the entire epic, the giant's shadow blocks the only exit, and he literally starts eating the crew. So how do they escape? Well, Odysseus relies on that famous intellect. He decides that the absolute best way to defeat a giant is to get him incredibly drunk on wine. And when the Cyclops asks for his name, Odysseus cleverly claims he is called Nobody. Once the giant finally passes out, Odysseus and his surviving men blind him with a sharpened, burning stake. And here is the brilliant punchline. When the blinded, agonizing Cyclops cries out for help to his giant neighbors, he shouts, "Nobody is hurting me." So naturally, the other Cyclopes just shrug, figure it's some sort of plague from the gods, and go right back to sleep. And that leaves Odysseus free to escape. I mean, it's easily one of literature's greatest tricks. But it actually sparks a huge debate today. Historians don't believe this literally happened, obviously, but some scholars suggest this story might be preserving these distorted, ancient memories of early encounters with unfamiliar peoples, or just strange, terrifying landscapes. Others see it as pure myth. There's really no solid scholarly consensus, but man, it is an unforgettable narrative. As the journey drags on, the dangers just get stranger and stranger, but they might have been rooted in very real fears. You've got the Sirens, promising forbidden knowledge through an irresistible song that lures sailors to a watery grave. You've got Scylla, a horrifying six-headed monster, and Charybdis, this massive whirlpool that literally swallows the sea. But underneath all that myth, these monsters most likely represented the very real, terrifying hazards of ancient navigation. We're talking treacherous currents, razor-sharp coastal rocks, and unexpected, violent storms. While interpretations linking these monsters to specific real-world geography are pretty speculative, think about it from their perspective. To an ancient sailor trapped in a tiny wooden boat, a sudden deadly current might as well be a six-headed monster trying to eat you, right? Let's move to Section 3,
The return to Ithaca. The kingdom awaits.
Now, while Odysseus was out spending a decade wandering the Mediterranean, fighting monsters and barely surviving shipwrecks, his kingdom back home was completely falling apart. Back in Ithaca, these powerful, greedy nobles had basically overrun the palace halls. Everyone just assumed Odysseus was dead. So these suitors were feasting on his wealth, totally disrespecting his young son Telemachus, and most importantly, vying to marry his wife, Penelope, so they could claim the throne as king. But Penelope, she was just as clever as her husband. For years, she delayed these powerful, audacious men with a trick. She promised she would choose a new husband only after she finished weaving a burial shroud. But get this, every single night by lamplight, she secretly unraveled what she had painstakingly woven during the day. Now, whether Penelope herself was a real historical figure is totally unknown, but this act of brilliant delay, this quiet daily rebellion, it represents the profound emotional core of the epic. Her patience absolutely became one of literature's defining symbols of loyalty. And that fierce loyalty is finally rewarded after 20 long, agonizing years. But Odysseus doesn't just march right through the front door as king. He's too smart for that. Step 1. He disguises himself as a beggar to see exactly who is still loyal, silently enduring the awful mockery of the suitors. Step 2. A challenge is issued to string the king's massive, dusty bow, a feat literally none of these arrogant suitors can pull off. And step 3, Odysseus steps forward, takes the bow, strings it effortlessly, and reveals his true identity. What follows this dramatic revelation is easily one of the bloodiest, most tension-filled scenes in all of Greek literature, as the king takes his palace back by force. Which brings us to our final section, Section 4. Did Odysseus actually exist? The historical truth. So, we've seen the monsters, we've marveled at the clever tricks, and we've witnessed the bloody revenge. But did a guy named Odysseus actually return from the ruins of Troy to a kingdom in Ithaca? Well, the hard truth is that despite archaeologists heavily excavating the ruins of ancient Ithaca and studying all these ancient manuscripts, absolutely no surviving archaeological evidence can confirm if Odysseus was a real historical person. Most historians firmly believe that the Odyssey is not a literal historical biography. But hey, that doesn't mean it's fake. It just makes it something entirely different and honestly, perhaps even more fascinating. Because the epic's actual journey is pretty wild. It starts way back in the Bronze Age, where these tiny kernels of real historical memory were preserved. For centuries, it was shaped by generations of oral storytelling, literally sung around campfires, constantly changing and growing. Then, around the 8th century BC, it was finally written down, traditionally, and, yeah, pretty controversially, attributed to the poet Homer. And from there, it traveled all the way through time to the modern day, where it endures as one of humanity's greatest works of literature. It is quite literally a Bronze Age memory wrapped incredibly tightly in myth. So why does all this matter to us today? Well, it's because history asks the question, what happened? But myth? Myth asks a completely different question. It asks, what does it mean? And the Odyssey survives because it speaks powerfully to both of those questions. Whether Odysseus actually sailed among literal physical monsters, or whether he only sailed through the exaggerated fears of human imagination, his journey has essentially become our own. I mean, we literally use his name today, an Odyssey, for any great trying journey we take. So what is the ultimate takeaway of this massive epic? It boils down to one word: home. For nearly 3,000 years, humanity has returned to this specific story time and again. And why is that? Because beneath the gods, the Cyclops, and the shipwrecks, we are all searching for exactly the same thing he was: a place to belong, a place to return to, home. It kind of makes you wonder, what monsters are we creating in our own minds today on our journey to get there? Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today, and keep questioning the history behind the stories we tell.